And that led me to, in fact, I really swim from one pool to the next when I work. And it led me to think also about our relation to computer thinking. Because if we accept that we are, I would say descending, but maybe sucked, we could use many images, sucked into or actually joining the computer, pretty much the way wolves joined man 8,500 years ago, that we would say, instead of resisting, we should probably better understand and collaborate, and that we would become some kind of unity. And I don't mean a silly cybernetic dream. I mean literally integrating the computer and becoming part of an algorithm, ultimately speaking like algorithms maybe. This is all perfectly possible, and it looks like it's in the line of expectation that we will absorb computing in such a way that we will integrate into it. It's this ongoing relation between man and machine, but of course the mechanical machine is a dream that's long gone, and now it's computing. And if Freud would have compared the mind or the brain to a steam engine, in our time surely it's an algorithm or AI or computing. Now, when we look at the brain, it's very particular. Our brain is ever nicely divided in two halves, which are never symmetrical, which are always different for a reason. And I got to two authors which taught me a lot, really hilarious stories in fact, but it's science. One is Julian Jaynes. He wrote The Origin of the Bicameral Mind. And, or no, actually it's different, The Origin of Consciousness in the bicameral mind. And with bicameral mind we understand that every living creature that has a nervous system also has a divided brain, a left and a right hemisphere, which are connected in a particular manner to the eyes. One hemisphere is connected to the opposite eye. And we all know that there's an important crossing here somewhere. But what I didn't realize is that consciousness itself is something that Julian Jaynes claims has its origin somewhere in the Bronze Age, where the brain starts to network the two halves. And religion, namely the hearing of voices or commands, originates also in that period, where there's really a struggle between an ever increasingly networked brain and an ever more awareness of this networked brain being active, and the fight or the conflict that exists between the two lateralities of the brain. Now, the left hemisphere is the one which resembles most a computer. It's the one which is, one could say, which works like a telescope. It's made to detect food in the distance, and it's probably at the origin of our conception of the lens, and nearing distance objects into our own vision, field of vision. While the right hemisphere has an entirely sort of devil's advocate role and plays caution. According to Ian McGilchrist, a neuroscientist who wrote a fantastic book, The Master and His Emissary, some 10 years ago, I believe, we have a tendency in our culture to rely too much on the left hemisphere. And if you think about it, it would make a lot of sense, because we are so dominated by computing, so dominated by criteria. The problem with the left hemisphere is that it's entirely happy with its own self. It doesn't realize that it has a problem. It doesn't realize it's not networked enough to the right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere is that part of the brain which, through evolution, helps you not to be eaten by other predators. So this is really the origin in our brains. Is one side looks for something in a distance while the other scans the 360 degrees. Now maybe you can sense that when I speak about 3D imaging and about synthetic images, the way I have been making them the past 10 years, I noticed some weird appearances, which many people working in the field actually acknowledge, is that we are in a situation, if we simulate a camera, where hypothetically the camera is everywhere in the world. It could be anywhere where there's a person, an author, that has the vision to record an image. So one could say the camera is really quite a liberated device. It's completely empty. It has no political purpose. It doesn't have any coordinate system. It doesn't have a particular role, and it really, all it wants to do is, or all it ever does, it grasps an image and basically promises a world around it. Now, the coordinate system upon which simulation is dependent, we could think the Euclidean or the Cartesian coordinate system, the three axes, x, y, z, is where simulation happens. This is a place where nothing is liberal. Nothing can go where it wants to go, where every little pixel or every little point in space has a determined place. The paradox of simulation in image making is that it would appear to be liberated while it is actually commanded. And this is where I find that we're probably looking towards a future where we have a much stronger integration between what we see, what we observe, and the commands we get. Now, I know this is all a bit abstract. I'm throwing at you things that well, have required at least half a year of thought, if not more, for me to understand anything about it. But it does inform the things that I do. And you can pick any example. When I made 15 years ago, I would say by now, the Bordeaux Piece with the actor Josse de Pauw, which was a repetition of short films, about 75 short films, where the actors were depleting themselves over the course of a day in real time, and where the weather and the sun and the light and the shadows were actually the real actors in the background. I realize now that I was in fact at that time already busy with a struggle between a spontaneous movement of the passage of time and that which is made by words, which is of course acting and speech. And there was a kind of fight. I was trying to feel in what way I could make that backdrop speak louder than the actors. To pick another example, a work which I made much more recently, which is, I abbreviate at Olympia, but which is in fact has a title of Olympia, the real-time disintegration of the Berlin Olympic Stadium over the course of 1,000 years, which is in fact a computer program, and which in a very different manner, in a much more radical synthetic manner, has as its subject matter again the background, vegetation. One could say it's a techno-hippie work in the sense that it's extremely technological. It was really the product of, one could say, an autistic mind that can only evolve in the repetition of the same thought over and over again and make minimal combinations, which basically is what the computer does. It gets its entire universe out of zeros and ones. And so it's always a matter of fighting something synthetic or something that might be part of the left hemisphere, that which hunts, which is basically really working like a gun, and upon which our entire economy is working, politics, you name it. we're really into the left hemisphere, working with that system, which is computing, and then at the same time also not cracking the code, because that would really be a different approach, but undermining it.